بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. أما بعد, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the previous lesson, we spoke about the hadith, about the 5 pillars. And we basically talked about the words of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, how they had beautiful connotations, and how Islam is basically a home for all of the believers. And that is something that we can take from the words of the hadith. Now, the hadith is very clear. It doesn't require much commentary, but I thought that, talking about the 5 pillars, there's so much to talk about in regards to 5 pillars. When it comes to these 5 that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam pointed out, they are known as the ibadat, or the acts of worship in Islam. So in terms of fiqh and what the books of fiqh speak about, it's very extensive. It would take years to actually cover salah, zakat, hajj, fasting in Ramadan. So we're not really going to go over that. And that's not what we want to really take from these lessons anyway. That would be different majalis, gatherings of fiqh, in which the teacher would speak about the rulings and how to apply those in our lives. But rather what we could really take from this is a spiritual aspect. How should we behave when it comes to salah? How should our mindset be regarding salah, regarding fasting, regarding hajj, regarding zakat, all of these issues? So that is not something that we usually cover in other gatherings as well. So this seems like a good place, inshallah, to go over these. So we'll talk about some spiritual points regarding the 5 pillars, inshallah. And obviously the first pillar that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in the hadith, he says, "Bunya al-Islamu ala khams, shahadati an la ilaha illallah, wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." So that is the first pillar of Islam, the major pillar, the foundational pillar out of all of the 5 pillars are obviously all foundational, but the shahadatain has the most importance, such that if a person is missing this pillar, then none of the other pillars will mean anything. If a person misses one of the other pillars, there is some way he can make up for that, or a person can get by. Although a person won't be kamil in their Islam, they won't be complete in their Islam, they'll still manage if they're missing any of the other pillars. But the shahadatain, this is such a pillar that we cannot miss at all. So let's speak about this briefly. Okay, so now when we speak about the shahadatain, there is 2 major portions to the shahadatain, and that's why they're called shahadatain. In Arabic, this means the 2 shahadas. So one shahada is ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and the second one is wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. So these are 2 shahadas, but it's 1 pillar. And then we take a look at the first shahada, which is la ilaha illallah. So that is further broken down into 2 portions. You have la ilaha, and then you have illallah. So the first portion of that la ilaha is called the negation. We are negating something. So we all know what this means. It means that there is no one worthy of worship. La ilaha means there is no God. So often we translate it as there is no God. But in Arabic, ilah means one who is worshipped. So that means that there is no one worthy of worship. So ilah in Arabic, they translate as ma'bud. And ma'bud means one that is worshipped. So we are saying that there is no one worthy of worship. That is a negation. Obviously, a believer has illallah as well with that. And these two are inseparable. But we're going to talk about, la ilaha first, and then we'll go on to illallah. So when we talk about la ilaha, it's very clear. Alhamdulillah, in our deen, this is something that the Quran has as well as the shahadatain. It has a very clear meaning. When someone recites the Quran, the meanings of the Quran are very clear. If someone just knows Arabic, they can understand the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to all of mankind. It is not only for specialists or people who spend years upon years pondering over it. The Quran can be recited by a child if on condition that they know Arabic, they will fully understand. They'll understand the stories, they'll understand the commandments. MashaAllah, it's really amazing. And just as a child can understand the Quran, people of very, very high level of intellects still have difficulty fully understanding the Quran as well. This may seem like an oxymoron. What I'm saying is that Quran is a miracle. This is the only kitab ever that, a person of the highest level of knowledge, like in a great alim, they will be amazed by the gems in the Quran and will continuously learn more and more every time they recite. And a child that is just learning Arabic can also recite the Quran and understand. So there's no other book in existence that can do that. I spoke about this a few weeks ago in a khutbah, and I said that if you hand a doctor, like a medical doctor or a PhD in any field, you give him, for instance, Dr. Seuss. When we're in elementary school, they commonly read Dr. Seuss. So you hand him Dr. Seuss. And so he'll laugh, or he'll feel, he'll feel degraded if you hand him Dr. Seuss. He'll say, why are you giving me this book? And if you're serious about it, you're like, here, you have to read this. This is really amazing. Then, he'll be really upset. It's degrading because he reads textbooks, he reads these medical journals, he reads really intricate stuff. That's what he's used to. For him, that is entertaining. That is what is, stimulating for him. So if you give him Dr. Seuss, he's going to be really upset. Likewise, if you find a 10-year-old, a child, you give him a medical journal, he's not going to understand a single sentence. So that's what we commonly find in dunya. There's no book that you can just give to every person in every walk of life, despite their gender, their race, their age group, their level of education. You can't give them one book. Each person has different levels. That's why in school we go through a whole syllabus. That's the point of syllabi. You base the next level off of the previous, and you develop such that when you're in the highest level, the early levels seem like a joke. So that's how it is. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's miracle of the Quran is that it doesn't differentiate. So a person can be of the highest level of education and they will still find it amazing and they will continuously recite it. There's a hadith where Ali radiallahu anhu says that he heard Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying a lot of the Quran, and a part of that is وَلَا يَخْلُقُ عَنْ كَثْرَةِ الرَّدِّ. The Quran never gets old despite reciting it many times. Rather, a person, when they recite it over and over, they enjoy it even more. So just like that, the Quran is very clear, but it also has very deep meanings. Our shahada is the same. So we're saying La ilaha illallah. It's absolutely clear. There's no one worthy of worship other than Allah. It absolutely does not require any type of tashrih or discussion. It's very clear. But there's another depth to it. There's deeper meanings to La ilaha illallah. Not such that, it's hidden from people, but it's just, if we look at it in a deeper sense, we can derive a lot of different benefits and fruits from this statement. And this is our creed. This is, if you wanted to just write one sentence as to what Islam is, what it means to be a Muslim, this is it. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. That's all we need to explain our deen. These two sentences, it summarizes everything, the reason why we were created, everything in our lives. So that is why this is the absolute foundational pillar amongst the 5 pillars. So let's go back to the negation aspect, saying La ilaha. So la ilah, like I said before, there's no one worthy of worship. And I told you where that sentence comes from. Worthy of worship is a translation of ilah, because ilah, you'll commonly find that it's translated as God, but it also means um, one who is worshipped. So that's where you'll find both of these translations. Oftentimes you'll see there's no God except Allah, or you'll find that there's no one worthy of worship other than Allah. And that's because ilah can mean both. So there's no one worthy of being worshipped. So this negation is of anything that which is worshipped. So in essence, very clearly, we don't worship anything, obviously, other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To fully understand it, we have to first go into what is worship, right? When we're talking about worship. So here there's an Arabic word called al-Ubudiyyah. Ubudiyyah means worship in Arabic. And this other word is called tadallul. Tadallul means displaying humility. So essentially the definition of ubudiyah, where you get the word abd, like Abdullah, ubudiyah is the root of that. That means slavery or worship. And there is also another distinction between slavery and worship, but they have the same root. But I'm not going to go into all of that right now. It's just going to talk about ubudiyah. It means humility. So when a person worships, they perform different acts to display that humility. And then ibadah. Ibadah is a word that we commonly use. In Islam, we have ibadat, which is salah, zakah, som, hajj. These are the acts of worship, which is called ibadat. Actually, this word ibadah has a lot of meaning in it. So the last point on the page says, ibadah is more emphasized than ubudiyah. So ubudiyah means worship. Ibadah is a higher level of worship. What ibadah means is the highest form of tadallul or humility, the highest form of humility directed to one whose generosity is of the highest form. So that is the meaning of ibadah. It's not just worship, it's the highest level of humility. And it's directed to the being who has the highest form of generosity. So that is when you use the word ibadah. It's basically the limits of ubudiyah. So ubudiyah is general worship, and ibadah is a very high level of worship. That is why in Islam we are told that we are not allowed to bow before anyone. And in salah, we bow not only in ruku', but we go all the way down to sujud. And sujud is the highest level. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that the believer is closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he is in sajda. And that is because you are physically, when you're in salah, you're supposed to be also spiritually and mentally, along with the physically, at the closest or the heights of tadallul or humility. So when we get to salah, we're gonna talk about different spiritual aspects of salah, how to perform salah in a spiritual manner. But right now, we're talking about ibadah. When a person is in sajda, they are physically, obviously, at the height of humility. There's no further form of humility that a person can adopt in terms of posture. So sajda is the most humble position a person can be. And we are, prohibited from even bowing before other people. Like after a play or something, people will bow. Muslims are not allowed to bow before people. Because that is how much pride a believer has. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us such pride as being humans that we don't bow before anyone. But when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we go so humble, we go beyond ubudiyah, which is just humility, and then we go to ibadah, which is the highest level of humility. And it's directed to the highest being. So we go all the way down to sajda, and we will talk about this inshallah. When you're physically in sajda, then mentally also you should be in sajda, and spiritually with your heart you should also be in sajda. So there should be three aspects to that sajda. There should be a physical aspect, a mental aspect, and an aspect dealing with the heart as well. We'll talk about that later. But still, we're just talking about ubudiyya and ibadah. So this is what we're actually talking about, la ilaha, that there is no one worthy of worship. So in order to dissect that, to understand that more, we need to understand what worship is. That's why I spoke to you about this right now. So worship, or ibadah, is the highest form of humility. Okay, actually there was a little bit more that I wanted to say, that a person, when they're an abd, you hear this all the time, Abdullah. So it's a name, very common name, and one of the most beloved names to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Abdullah. So this word abd can have different meanings. You know, everyone on the planet, every human and every jinn is already considered an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there are different levels of an abd. So level number one is just man and jinn. Every single man, woman, every single jinn, they are considered the abds of Allah. So here, abd would in English would translate as a slave. It wouldn't be worshipper, it would be slave, because not all human beings worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know disbelievers do not worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shayateen do not worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this form of abd, the first level of abd is slave, meaning a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the second level of abd is all created objects. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran talks about how the sun, or in the hadith as well, the sun does sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The trees do sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The earth, everything in existence does the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that everything in existence does tasbih of Allah. وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُمْ. You don't understand that they're doing tasbih, but they are. So in this sense, the second level of abd is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are different ways abd is used. So number one is just all man and jinn. Number two is every created object is also an abd. And that's why in the Quran you may see that, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to the earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the mountains. In the story of Nuh alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقِيلَ يَا أَرْضُ بِلَعِي مَاءَكِ وَيَا السَّمَاءِ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the earth, O earth, swallow up the water. O sky, retain the water. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to all of these because they are the slaves of Allah. They are in His complete control. And number three, that I said there's 4 levels of abd. You could say number one is just all creation, then you get more specific. Then you go to man and jinn. These are all the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And number 3 and number 4 are basically the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worshippers. So in category 3 and 4, you will actually talk about being a worshipper of Allah. So again, category 1, we could say all created objects. Everything in existence is a slave to Allah in the sense that they obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command. Nothing happens without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. So the earth that is, you know, rotating, revolving, the sun, all the heavenly bodies, everything on earth, all of this is under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's control. In that sense, everything is abd. That would be level 1. Level 2 is a slave of Allah, which means all of mankind and all of jinn. This includes the kuffar as well. They are also the slaves of Allah. Whether they admit it or not, they are the creation and the servants or the slaves of Allah. And then number 3 and number 4 are what you would say a servant or a worshipper. So this is split up into 2. Now, every human is going to be a khadim or an abid, meaning a servant or a slave, either to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or to someone other than Allah. So you have worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are the Muslims, the believers, and those who turn towards the dunya, they are the lovers of the dunya. So this whole thing that I'm telling you guys, you know, 4 levels of abd, what's the point? The point is, this is the type of worship, these number 3 and number 4 specifically, You're either going to worship Allah or you're going to worship the dunya. There's no other option. Either you turn towards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you are obeying your nafs, you are obeying your desires, you are obeying shaitan, you are obeying dunya. All of that is in one category. So when we say la ilaha, a very general meaning is that there is no one worthy of worship, meaning no gods. We don't believe in a trinity. We do not believe in anyone as partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his power or any aspects of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divinity. We don't believe in, idols, any demigods, any of that. That is the general meaning of la ilaha. But a deeper meaning of la ilaha is we do not have a very deep love and connection with anything like we do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like the last two categories I spoke about, a sincere worshiper of Allah or a lover of dunya. You're either one of the two. So we do not place dunya in our hearts the way we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we say la ilaha illallah, we are negating not only all other idols and other demigods or whatever, partners associated with Allah. We also negate all other things, the sources of which we put our attention to. So that is a deeper meaning of la ilaha illallah. So when we say la ilaha illallah, we should negate everything. No one is worthy of my attention other than Allah. That's a deeper meaning of la ilaha illallah. We'll talk about this a little bit more. There's three categories. I'll share that with you, inshallah. So now establishment. So when we say the first part was negation. La ilaha, that's a negation. There is no God. Now establishment, or in Arabic, you'll call that ithbat. In Arabic, they'll call that an-nafyu wal-ithbat. Nafi means negation. Ithbat means establishment. So la ilaha, negation. And the establishment, illallah. So when one says illallah, they are establishing oneness. So what you did when you said la ilaha is you canceled out every single thing. There's different levels of this canceling out. And that's the next slide I'll share with you, the different levels of la ilaha. So depending on the level, the establishment will be greater in your heart. So you say illallah, you're establishing the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's nothing worthy of worship, nothing worthy of my attention. And then illallah, you establish his oneness. And in Arabic, this is called tawheed. Oneness is called tawheed in Arabic. So we heard this word so many times, tawheed, or meaning our aqaid, our belief. It literally means oneness. To establish Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's oneness is the central aspect of Islam. This is the pivotal point of Islam, la ilaha illallah. Because this is shared between all the different shariahs. We are in the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so we say la ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. But the people of Musa alayhi salam, people of Isa alayhi salam, people of Ibrahim alayhi salam, they didn't say Muhammadur Rasulullah. They had la ilaha illallah, but the second part of their creed was different because their Nabi was different. And these were different shariahs. But la ilaha illallah is the one constant. So this is the central focus of all of the correct deens that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent down. It's one deen, different shariahs, different ahkam and laws. So this is called tawheed. The second point here, this means that there is no one worthy of being humble in front of. Remember, if you remember the meaning of abd or worship means to make oneself humble in front of some other being who is worthy of reverence. So this means that there is no one worthy of being humble in front of, serving and loving other than Allah. So that is what ibadah is, showing humility. Number two, serving. And number three, loving a being. So when we direct this towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is tawheed, and this is true, Islam. And like I said before, there's different levels. There's a general level when we perform salah, we say la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, but sometimes our attention goes to other things. We have love for the dunya. We go towards, these very small attractions, and we get distracted from Islam. So this is a very weak level of tawheed because we're only saying it, we're only giving a lip service. A stronger level of tawheed accompanies a stronger level of iman as well. We'll talk about that right now, inshallah. So there are three stages of people when understanding La ilaha illallah. And this is what I was referring to, a depth of this meaning. And I gave them different names. This is not something that is mentioned in the hadith or anything like that, but we can understand it in this sense because this relates to the previous hadith when we talked about Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. So let's look at stage number one. This is the level of an individual in terms of how much yaqeen, how much conviction, how much faith they have in Allah. Then when they say La ilaha illallah, they will feel a different aspect. This is a spiritual thing that people feel when they say La ilaha illallah, depending on how close they are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So stage number one is general Muslims. All of us, anyone who is a Muslim, when they say La ilaha, when they're negating all gods or anything worthy of worship, when one says La ilaha, they are negating the fact that anything is worthy of worship. So this is a general level, like I said before. This includes idols, demigods, a trinity, or any partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This, every single individual has to have this amount of belief. Whether, they have to have this in order to gain salvation in the hereafter. If a person does not have this amount of belief, La ma'buda illallah, there is no one worthy of worship other than Allah. This Arabic that I put here is just, a different understanding of ilaha. Like I said before, La ilaha illallah, there is no God other than Allah. So you can understand ilaha to mean different things based off of the level of iman that you have. So that the basic level is that there is no one worthy of worship. My worship is not going to be pointed towards anyone other than Allah. This is the minimum requirement for a person to have salvation in the hereafter. If a person does not have this much belief, then it doesn't matter if you do as many good works as you can. A person is, a huge humanitarian spending billions for the, upliftment of mankind. But if they do not have this belief that there is no one worthy of worship other than Allah, then it doesn't matter. They will receive good in this dunya because of the good that they are doing. But in the hereafter, they will not have salvation. This is the bare minimum. And this, alhamdulillah, all Muslims have this. If they do not have this, then they're not Muslim. This is the bare requirement to be a Muslim. La ilaha illallah, and obviously Muhammad Rasulullah as well. So this is the minimum requirement. Stage two, which I titled a mu'min, a person. So a Muslim, we know from the previous hadith, a person that has Islam is a person that has the physical ibadat. And this is what this hadith is all about. Bunya al-Islamu ala khams. Islam is based off of 5 pillars. So just like Islam deals with the physical, then La ilaha illallah, consider, like when you think about La ilaha illallah as there's no God other than Allah, then this is like, the bare minimum that everyone has to have. Everyone must believe this. Number 2 is like Iman. Iman is something that is in the heart. If you remember the previous hadith, Iman deals with the heart, all beliefs. You believe in the Malaika, you believe in Allah Ta'ala, you believe in the Anbiya alayhi salam, you believe in the Kutub, all of these things. They're beliefs. So in stage 2, when one says La ilaha, they negate all other things of worship that's already there, like in stage 1. But on top of that, not only do they have stage 1, but they have a higher level. They negate any power from anything. What does that mean? So, i.e., at this stage, a person reaches a level of conviction and certainty that nothing happens without the will of Allah. And I wrote in Arabic here, La maqsuda illallah. There is no point of attention other than Allah. So in stage 2, a person, because of doing so many good deeds and always being in a state of remembrance of Allah and being focused on their purpose in life, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they continue to do this for decades and decades. They reach a level where they have conviction that nothing happens without the will of Allah. And we already know this, alhamdulillah, as a Muslim, you have to believe in this. You have to believe that nothing happens without the will of Allah. But there's a difference between just believing in it and having a very high level of conviction in it. When you see anything happening, and I spoke about this before when we spoke about ihsan, when you see anything happening, you automatically first see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, then you see the thing happening. This is a very high level of iman that is very hard to find someone of this level in today's time. If you see a car moving first, like when we see a car moving, do we think firstly that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power is what created all of these things to come together to cause this car to move? Then we see the car secondly. That rarely happens. That is a very high level. So these people, they have number one and they're at number two, where they say that there is no point, there's no focal point other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what la maqsuda illallah means. All of these are la ilaha illallah, but these people are of different levels in their conviction. And number three, I've titled that as a muhsin, as a person who has ihsan, is when one says la ilaha, they negate everything in existence. So this is very difficult to understand for us because things do exist. We can't say that I don't exist. I exist. I'm here. Alhamdulillah, you're there. We all exist. But what this means is, so look at the i.e. at this stage, a person realizes that the only true existence is Allah. There's a very, very high level where a person sees that my existence, your existence, the existence of this entire world, this entire universe, depends on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't exist, then nothing could exist. The only reason we exist is because Allah exists. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence is absolutely necessary. It's the only real thing that, that absolutely makes sense. But if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we wouldn't exist. So we are in reality a manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, right? It's not correct for a person to say that, you are a part of Allah or something. That's not Islam. That is not something that we believe in. We are not a part of Allah, na'udhu billah, but we are manifestations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has unlimited power, He has unlimited knowledge, He has, a will. So all of these things are the sources, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source from where we were created from. So people who are extremely high, these are the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're very close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they are continuously remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they know that in reality, we are all just a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, a normal believer believes all of these things, but these are just levels of conviction. I'm not talking about understanding the fact that they're correct. If I ask any one of you that, where do we come from? Everyone would say that Allah created us. That's something that even a child knows. But this is a level of conviction that a person who reaches this level of ihsan, they say that all existence, when they look at anything, they're just reminded of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see the wind blowing, you see trees moving, then you are reminded of the sifat, the divine qualities and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which created that. So you think of Allah's qudra, His power. You think of Allah's ilm, His knowledge. You think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's irada, His will, when these things happen. So these are different levels, different stages of people, and a journey of a believer. We kind of spoke about this before. We're just doing it again. This was talked about before when we spoke about ihsan, but just talking about the spiritual aspect of the shahadatain. So when we say la ilaha illallah, there's so much meaning in it. Generally, as Muslims, we all automatically believe if someone is not a Muslim, they accept Islam today, they will be at stage one automatically. And many of us, unfortunately, we will spend our entire lives, and some of us, we will stay at stage one, and we won't even know that there's a stage two. But those of us, inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us, then inshallah, we should make dua for this, that we go and reach this level of stage two where we see everything happening and we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of that. Like when you're at stage one, you know this. And if you try to remember this, that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of everything happening, you try to remember it, but after a while you'll forget. And that's where we start complaining, and we start, you know, what is it called? We're sinning, and we're doing all of these things. That's because we're not at the stage of stage 2. At stage 2, a person is like la maqsuda illallah. There's no focal point other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they realize that everything happens with the qudra and power of Allah. At stage 3, they see all existence is reality, in reality, a manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. So these are just different levels of, people when they say la ilaha illallah. Now, levels of remembrance. This is very, very similar to the previous slide. When we say la ilaha illallah, we're doing dhikr. We know that the best type of dhikr is la ilaha illallah. You sit with a tasbih, or you're counting on your fingers, and you say 100 times la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. Alhamdulillah, many of us, we do the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We remember him. Some of us do a lot of dhikr. Some, I'm sure, among you are doing 100 times a day. You say la ilaha illallah. Some maybe 500 times. Some even say 1,000 times. But there's different levels in quality, not in quantity. So a person can say la ilaha illallah 1,000 times a day, but I'm going to be talking to you here in this slide about the quality of saying la ilaha illallah. And that is actually really important. Some of the mashayikh, they say that when you're performing dhikr, you're doing dhikr, you also have to do fikr. So dhikr with fikr. What is fikr? Dhikr is remembrance, and fikr is joining the mind and the heart with the dhikr. So let's look at point number 1. Remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and establishing his oneness. Remember the negation and establishing la ilaha illallah. Establishing his oneness in dhikr is an important pillar of faith. So as a believer, we have to continuously remind ourselves, la ilaha illallah. There is no one worthy of worship other than Allah. However, when we do so, there are different layers. So Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah is a great scholar, great Imam in the past. He compared these levels to a fruit. So when we have a fruit, we have, let's say, the peel. So some certain fruits have peels. Some fruits just have directly the skin of the fruit and then the flesh. But let's say this fruit has a peel, a banana or some other type of fruit. It has this outer layer. Then you go, and underneath the outer layer, there's a layer of skin of the fruit. And then underneath the skin of the fruit, there's flesh of the fruit. And finally, you go all the way into the center, you reach the seed. And we know that, when we're eating the fruit, to us, having the fruit, what's really valuable is the flesh of the fruit when we eat the fruit. But what's more valuable to people is the seed of that fruit. Because with that seed, you can plant it and you can grow a tree, and then you can have even more of those fruit. So in reality, that seed is extremely valuable. So in this, keeping with this analogy, Imam al-Ghazali says the following. You have first, the first layer of remembrance is the peel of the fruit. And that is the stating with the tongue only. So when you say la ilaha illallah, that's just the outer form. So if we were just saying 1,000 times la ilaha illallah, but our minds, our hearts, none of that is engaging, then that is a very, very weak level of remembrance. We need to try to do more than that. After the peel of the fruit, you go deeper inside. You get to the skin. So the skin of the fruit is like remembrance of the mind, which is the presence of mind. So that is when you're saying la ilaha illallah, your mind's attached to it too. Try to do this 100 times. Sit with a counter, say la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, or just say la ilaha illallah 100 times. See if your mind can stay with la ilaha illallah, understanding it 100 times, or maybe the mind will stray. So that will tell us how far we are. So if one does not attempt to bring the mind on the dhikr, then the mind will wander. Many times we're doing dhikr, you're saying la ilaha illallah, but you're thinking about things that has already happened or something that you are planning to do later on in the day. So that is not true dhikr. So this second level is something that we should all strive for, and it's something very relevant to us. The last two are very, the last one is extremely obscure because we just never heard anything like it. But number three is also very attainable if we really try. And this is the flesh of the fruit, the one that we really enjoy. You know, which human enjoys eating a peel or the skin? Really, what we really enjoy is the flesh of the fruit. And that is the remembrance of the heart. So now you're saying La ilaha illallah, you're thinking La ilaha illallah, and then the heart also engages, the emotions come. You feel different when you're reciting this La ilaha illallah. This is the remembrance of the heart. It's changing the way your heart is. So when the remembrance becomes so ingrained, such that it is difficult to stop remembering. So one becomes engrossed in dhikr. They're just sitting there and they're just saying La ilaha illallah. They lose track of time. They're really enjoying it, and the heart is involved. And that is something we should all aim for. Very attainable, but it takes a lot of practice. And then the final stage, which is the seed, the most valuable part. This is the true remembrance. This is when a person cannot remove their mind from the dhikr because it became so powerful, and they start losing sense of other feelings. They're not smelling any, like they're not paying attention to any smells. Say for instance, say some fragrance around, but they can't smell it because their mind is so attached to La ilaha illallah. People are making noise around them. They can't hear anything. Their mind is on La ilaha illallah. Their senses are completely engrossed in La ilaha illallah. So that is where you will hear stories of like Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. He was hit with an arrow, and he said that, okay, the doctor can take it out when I'm in salah, because when I'm in salah, I won't feel anything. He didn't need any anesthetic or anything. He just engaged in salah. He was so deep into the remembrance that someone can come and pull an arrow out of his leg and he wouldn't feel it. So they lose sense of other feelings. This is a very, very high level of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah, next time we'll speak about this again because we've run out of time, inshallah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to reach these high levels of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May He give us tawfiq to get nearer to Him and to really, incorporate within our lives all levels of the shahadatain and become true believers and reach the level of ihsan, inshallah. Subhanallah wa bihamdi, subhanallah wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.